Hello, good to welcome you back to another episode of ideasSPACE with the urban design group UrbanNous and me, Christopher Martin. I'm an urban designer and planner focusing on the design of public realm and streets, co-founder and director of urban strategy at Urban Movement, and on the executive committee of the Urban Design Group. I'm really trying to explore the full range of issues that influence the design of cities and shape society with this series, so we can sharpen our focus and create more enjoyable places. And for this episode, we'll be focusing on skateboarding. Skateboarding is tolerated in some cities, shunned in others, but in both cases often treated as a nuisance. But urban skateboarding arguably takes the everyday, the municipal, the ill-conceived and forgotten parts of a city and transforms them into the active, the culturally rich and the fun parts of the city. Why then, when we pay some people to transform the dreary into the engaging, do we not extend this to the skateboarding community? This very much deserves more discussion and more exploration. So I'm thrilled to be joined by Iain Borden, architectural historian, urban commentator, professor of architecture and urban culture at the Bartlett, and expert in skateboarding in the city. So much so that this is the title of his marvellous book on the subject. Iain, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me. Delighted to be here. Always a joy to talk about skateboarding.
Yeah, certainly. I'm looking forward to it. And it's great to have you with us. And I'd first like to invite you to introduce us to your work, the history of skateboarding and its culture, and its relationship with cities and architecture, if you don't mind.
Yeah, will do. So I've got a short presentation. I'll share my screen.
Brilliant, thanks.
I've just got to work out how to do that.
Got to just that the sort of bottom arrow pointing up. Yeah, you got it.
Okay, is that on?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. So I'm an architectural historian and theorist at the Bartlett School of Architecture. And what I've been really interested in my work is not just the design of buildings and the production of buildings, but how people experience them. So in particular, how people who are not designers, who are not architects, who are not policymakers, who are not urban professionals, as it were, how they experience and encounter the spaces around them. And I did a book called The Unknown City with one of my colleagues, Jane Rendell, and other people, which you see top left of this image, about 20 years ago now, which was one of the first ways that we really explored that. But in particular, probably more than anything else, I've looked at skateboarding as a way in which people encounter cities who are not designers. And I've written this book, Skateboarding and the City. I've been researching it for 30 years. Also on this slide, you can see that I spend, bottom left, I spend quite a lot of my time talking to journalists and policymakers and so on about skateboarding. And I probably should also say that I've been a skateboarder myself for over 40 years. So some of my own personal experiences come into this. So I'm having trouble getting my slides to move. So on to the next slide. Just a quick bit about the history of skateboarding. As most people know, it kind of starts in the 60s and 70s, very much associated with with skateboarding in swimming pools. In the 1980s and 1990s, it becomes very much a street-based activity. And I think that's how a lot of people think of it today. And in particular also has qualities of masculinity, danger, risk-taking, that kind of thing in the 90s and into the 2000s. Some other things about it, there's very much a kind of DIY, independent, go out and make it, do it yourself element to it. So what you see here are two very different extremes of the DIY skate park scene. The one image on the left is just really some obstacles that some skateboarders in South London had built. On the right, in Portland, Oregon, something called Burnside, which is really an elaborate skate park, but built by skateboarders themselves.
It's the down arrow I think you want.
Yeah. And then the other thing that goes on, I think is important about skateboarding is that there are skate parks, these kind of wondrous wonderlands for people to skate in. This is a new multi-million-pound skate park currently being built in Folkestone called F51. The world's first ever multi-story indoor purpose-designed skate park, and I had a very, very small part to play in helping to design this. So the challenge really for skateboarding is, how do you bring these things together? How do you bring this sort of independence of street skateboarding, this DIY spirit, and perhaps the design possibility of skate parks? How do you bring all those things together in one form? So just some different ways that that's taken place. One is in heritage. So we've started to see bits of the city being heritage protected, either at the top here in London at the Undercroft in the South Bank, where a bit of urban realm that is not designed for skateboarding but has been used by skateboarders for 40 odd years now, has in a way got some kind of protection, got some section 106 protection, so it can always be used by skateboarders. And at the bottom is a skate park called ROM skate park in Hornchurch in Essex, which has been grade 2 listed. So we're starting to see skateboarding enter into heritage debates and conversations. We're also getting lots of just skate parks built. So I live in southeast London. I live in just south of Brixton. This is a skate park in Crystal Palace Park that I was involved in. And it's a very well designed park. It's done by a skate park company called Canvas, with a professional landscape designer, KLA, but working with the community. And it's a community facility, and you often see hundreds of people there, all kinds of different backgrounds and ages, all coming together. It's a kind of great social space, really. And then there are, it's probably worth saying that some skate parks are amazing designs. So this is one in Oslo, designed by Dark Architecture, with a pretty extraordinary, or certainly in skate park terms, modernist exterior, and a celebration even of the wooden, in this case wooden skate park forms inside it. But I think the real challenges for skateboarding today are to really to think about how it integrates into the urban realm. So I just want to show a couple of 2 or 3 ways that can occur. And one, I think most obviously, is events. Skateboarding can be part of a kind of programming of urban space. So this is a project called Inner Skate, which we did at UCL, my university, at its here east on the Queen Elizabeth side. And it was a one-day celebration of skateboarding in an outdoor area of the Queen Elizabeth site. And we had some ramps designed and made by one of our engineer students. But it was also a celebration of adaptive skateboarding. So this is skateboarding done by people who are physically challenged in some way. So people's in wheelchairs, or the person you see top middle is a guy called Dan Mancina, and he's a professional skateboarder, but he happens to be blind. So he uses his stick to kind of measure out spaces. And there's quite a lot of interest in the moment in the way that skateboarding can increase inclusivity in urban space. So this was a one-day kind of celebration of that possibility. And related to that, UCL is now building some new buildings at the south end of the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in London. And one of the things we're exploring there is we're working with a group called City Mill Skate as how we can make the spaces between the buildings there not exclusionary of skateboarding. So we're not trying to ban skateboarding, as you often get in public spaces, but the opposite. So we're trying to work out how we can welcome and include skateboarding onto those sites, partly to welcome skateboarders, but partly to make those spaces more inclusive and more welcoming for the public in general. So in this case, skateboarding is a kind of a way of increasing public involvement. And then just sort of two examples, I think, of where I think the this can be done in quite a progressive way within urban design. So this is a water square in Rotterdam, which is basically a great bit of public space, which also happens to incorporate skateboarding within it. So there are various features in here. The square is designed to flood or to bring in water at different times of the year. But when it's not, then skateboarding has been included within it. And then the final example is, I mentioned the Undercroft at the South Bank Centre in London. This was the alternative design that we had as a kind of a fail-safe backdrop if skateboarding had to move from the Undercroft. And this was done by a Danish Copenhagen-based practice called SNE, just to work out how you can design great public space that is good for skateboarding and parkour and graffiti. So those are very briefly, some of the ways that I think rich skateboarding culture can be introduced into public space.
Thanks for that. Yeah, loads of food for thought. And if you feel free to take the slides down now, and we can carry on. But I think you've given us some really great examples about how we can sort of embed skateboarding in our public spaces to activate them. But often skateboarding, or certainly sort of historically, skateboarding has been hidden in plain sight in cities. As I mentioned in the intro, it's kind of famous as a sport for hunting out and unearthing everyday municipal architecture and transforming it into sort of active, noticeable, culturally rich parts of the city. So why, I suppose, the big question is, why is skateboarding dismissed at best, and sometimes even reviled in cities?
Yeah, it's a complex question, and that's always been the case. Ever from when skateboarding started in the 1960s, that was the case. I mean, I think there are a number of reasons for it. People often point to the damage that skateboarders cause. And yeah, they might scratch a few things, but I don't think that's, you can design that out. People get worried that skateboarders might, bump into a frail elderly body and cause them damage. And I've been researching skateboarding for 40 years now, and I've never come across an actual instance of that happening. People are worried about it, but it doesn't really occur. Certainly not very frequently. I think the main reason is that skateboarding is seen to be disorderly and seen to be somehow kind of not contributing to the productive or commercial nature of the city. One of the things I've explored in my book is that skateboarding is, in a way, is a kind of critique of some of the fundamental values that some people hold of urban space, namely that it should be used for productive and consumption purposes. And so I think when people revile skateboarding, they're worried in a way about the kind of conceptual challenge it's making to how we value public space.
Yeah, that's interesting. And sort of on the issue of designing out skateboarding, I think the miserable anti-skateboarding measures, which we all too often see on benches and at low and sort of low edges, which make it uncomfortable to sit, if nothing else. Which mostly are regrettable sort of bolted on additions, which bear no resemblance to the actual design of the thing. Sort of when did these start appearing? What is their sort of ambition? Obviously to stop skateboarding, but sort of more deeply, what do you think is behind that, and do they work?
Well, it's part of this kind of logic of hostile architecture, isn't it? Where we see a kind of genre of people or a genre of activities being repelled. And skateboarders are often treated like the homeless in this, people sort of, and I think this is connected to the idea that many street skateboarders are younger and male. And if you're male and teenage in the city, and a lot of street skaters are, you're automatically assumed to be a hoodlum or a robber or a thief or a gang member and so on, which isn't the case, but somehow, it's part of that. People started to try and exclude skateboarding in design terms. I think I first saw it in Bishopsgate in London in the mid-90s, when people started putting these vertical dividers up on benches. And there was a guy in San Diego called Chris Lowry. And in the late 90s, he developed these metal knobs that you refer to, skate stoppers, his brand. And they kind of spread very quickly through America into, I've next saw them in Sydney, in Australia, and in Vancouver. And now you see them everywhere. So Chris Laura's company, Skate Stoppers, reckon they've installed these at over 10,000 sites around the world. And as you say, they're pretty mean, and they're pretty miserable, and they're pretty ugly. And it just seems to me to be exactly the wrong thing we should be doing with actually something, such a positive activity, which is skateboarding.
Yeah, it's amazing. Someone actually wants to put their name to those kind of things. But interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something we've looked at, working with the skate community, especially to sort of activating these spaces which are cities have forgotten. I mean, it seems very alien to me to actually physically design it out. But I think just looking more at the sort of cultural aspects, and you touched briefly on the idea on the emergence of skate parks, and sort of suggested they skate parks as we know them today sort of emerged in the 1970s. And they were manufactured to replicate the sort of municipal structures that were being used by skateboarders previously, sort of pools or empty facilities like that. And then that sort of in their ebb and flow, they sort of stagnated, and skating moved from skate parks to these everyday incidental urban environments and sort of streets, as you said. How did this kind of ebb and flow change urban skating culture, especially now it's on the street? And indeed, what effect did this have on cities and urban culture?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very complex thing. I mean, what street skateboarding did more than anything is it kind of democratized skateboarding. So you don't have to pay to use a skate park. Yeah. You can just walk outside of your door, and the whole point about street skateboarding is the whole city becomes a pleasure ground. And there are all kinds of things that go with that, including a critique of architecture. So skateboarders are obsessed with architecture, but perhaps not in the way that people in the design professions are. You know, they enact a critique of architecture based on, is it good to skate or not? What we're seeing in skate park design, actually, interestingly today, is that the best of them are a kind of melange of the old 1970s swimming pools, but also they simulate streets a little bit. But that doesn't also mean that skateboarders only skate in skate parks. If you build a skate park, you won't stop skateboarders from riding in streets. They just become one of the many environments that skateboarders like to ride in. So you're seeing a kind of mix of the sort of sporty end and the more subcultural street-based activity in skateboarding. And I think it's made it much richer. And I think it's made the contribution it makes to society much richer as a result as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you often see I always say it's not a solution to surrender when people start trying to sort of pigeonhole people in different things and not let people do certain activities. And I think sort of working with these urban environments to sort of bring it to life is key. I suppose just touching on that, the crux of it is why should cities really care? Why should we cherish this cultural asset, as we both agree it is, in front of us? And what does skateboarding give society, I suppose, and people who don't skate? So what are the kind of what are the benefits to everybody in this act?
Well, it's entangled with what it brings to skateboarders themselves. So, you know, what do we want people to do? Do we want them to be indoors all the time, playing video games, conversing only digitally? And those things can be great things to do, but we also want people to go outside and easily make connections, use their whole body, be mentally and physically well and healthy. And skateboarding is one of the ways that happens. And it's particularly good at reaching, it's a physical and healthy activity that doesn't require 21 other people and a training schedule and booking a pitch and league competition. You know, anyone can go out and do it. In the same way you can go out and run or cycle around the streets. And it's incredibly kind of creative. So a lot of skateboarders are also into art and photography and film, and it's can be quite entrepreneurial as well. You know, there are amazing brands and companies that have sprung out of skateboarding. So that's all, you know, that's all good for skateboarders. And of course, skateboarders are members of society. So what you're promoting through skateboarding is, you know, values of independence and creativity and becoming a fully formed member of society amongst skateboarders. who obviously are, part of just like everybody else. They're not just skateboarders. They are members of society who have fulfilled themselves through this particular path, or partly through this other path. But your other question about, what does this bring to cities? One of the things that was amazing about the Undercroft protest to keep skateboarding at the South Bank Centre is that something like 150,000 people signed a petition to keep skateboarding away. Now, were they supporting skateboarding? Yes. But what I think they were really doing, in a kind of bigger question, is that we don't want all our cities, or all parts of our city, to turn into kind of shopping and retail opportunities, because that's what the threat was there. And they were saying that, however much we all might like a mocha frappuccino or some nice sushi, we don't want that to be the only offer in a city. And I think what skateboarders do is they just add to that thing that cities do generally, which is to kind of surprise us and to provide something different and uncertain and colourful and maybe even a bit noisy and a bit risky at times, more so than just walking along a typical high street. So I think skateboarders just add to that kind of richness, dynamic richness of urban life.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point. And we were doing some work in Glasgow recently, and which involved lots of these kind of very sort of industrial spaces with sort of motorway infrastructure. And we worked actually with the skating community because they actually gave a really interesting dynamic to the evening and nighttime and sort of hours of darkness kind of experience of the city, and really brought those spaces to life, which could actually be really unwelcoming and quite miserable spaces. But with the skateboarding community there, they actually became really interesting and somewhere you would go.
I showed the Burnside skate park in Portland, Oregon. That started off as a really nasty bit of it's under a bridge in Portland, and it was basically used for drug dealing and sex workers and other stuff. And the skateboarders came along and they just built a little kind of 2-foot little bit of concrete, and they've gradually added to it. And they've been credited with helping to stabilize that area. I mean, the point whereby actually, one version of skateboarding is that they can act as the kind of shock troops of gentrification along with artists. And it has happened in other places. And that, isn't necessarily what we all want in cities to happen either. But they certainly, they put eyes and ears on the street. And as you say, often early morning, in the evenings, at night. And they help build a presence, a public presence, and quite a benign public presence as well.
And they sort of build a legitimate culture, which at the end of the day is what all development is after, and trying to find in the city. So that's I suppose why it's linked to the art and ways of gentrification in that way. But I suppose as a final question, you're very well known for extolling the history, the virtues and the benefits of skateboarding to society. And to capitalise on this, in your opinion, how can cities welcome and how can cities design for this creative, political and urban act that is skateboarding?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing people can do is don't put skate stoppers in and don't put up a no skateboarding sign. In a way, it's as simple as that. But I think there are other things, and I would say is to try and work on a strategy of engagement. So skateboarders sometimes call them skate dots, and this is what we're trying to do at the UCL buildings on the Queen Elizabeth site. It's just tiny little things. It could just be a skatable bench or a skatable piece of public art dotted around, or it could be something just a little bit bigger, a skate spot where skateboarders might want to stay for a longer time. It could be incorporated within a park. It could be a local skate park with a few features, or it could be one of those kind of wonderlands like the skate park in Oslo or the one in Folkestone. So I would think about a plurality of different engagements at different scales and different dispersals around a locale. And above all, don't just think that it's only a skate park. Skate parks are great, but they're not the only way of providing for skateboarding and making the best of it.
Yeah, and I think we've learned that lesson in play, haven't we? We're now always talking about sort of incidental play and informal play and getting play into streets. So really, it's really no different from that. And I really love the idea of skate dots. I'm going to take that one forward. I think there's skating and the sort of what it can offer is it's a real treasure trove of cultural energy that we should be embracing when we're designing cities. And we really need to be shaping sort of the inclusive, energetic, and culturally significant and fun cities going forward. Especially because quality of life, as I see it, will play a bigger and bigger role in cities, and in our choices about which city to live in or which city to put our businesses in following this crisis. I feel like we could talk about this all evening, but I think that's probably all the time we have for this episode. So I just want to thank you again, Iain. That's been excellent, and I want to encourage those who want to learn more to read your excellent book, Skateboarding in the City. I also want to thank everyone who is listening to this. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of ideasSPACE by the Urban Design Group, UrbanNous, and me, Christopher Martin. There's more episodes coming your way, so please do get in touch if you have any questions, and follow the ideasSPACE YouTube channel for more. So thanks very much.